right, thank you, Haley. That's fascinating. All right, our next speaker here is going through a presentation for us related to his topic. This is Dr. Paul Quinn, who is professor of physics here at Kutztown. It is going. Okay, here you go.
Hi, I'm Dr. Quinn, and I'm a physics professor. But besides just being a physics professor and teaching physics, I enjoy comic books. I've collected them since I've been a kid, and I really believe that comics change culture. So at first, when comics came out, they weren't cool. Comics were basically thought of as lowbrow. People weren't supposed to read them, and basically it was for kids, and sometimes caused kids to do some things that weren't good. And so what is a comic? Well, basically you take these pictures and images, and you use less words and just little blurbs, and you use that to tell a story. And that story is something that could keep your attention, it could send a message. It depends on what the origin of the comic is. Well, when they started, the comics were all about humor. So it was about making people laugh. And so you had these strips that were in the newspapers. I remember as a kid, even on Sundays, you'd have the funny papers, is what they were called by my grandmother. You'd have like Hagar the Terrible or Blondie. But it wasn't until the early 1900s where you had the first breakout character. Okay, so this breakout character was from Hogan's Alley, and it was basically the story of a person that lived in an urban area looking through the lens of someone that was an immigrant. So later on, the imaginations explored other areas, like you had to do with different dimensions and the dream world and things of that nature, where it wasn't just about the character's everyday life. But it wasn't until 1938, Superman came out, and it was the first hero. And so that changed comics forever, because you had others like the Phantom, you had Batman, and these actually focused on the storyline of a hero and how those heroes basically looked at others. A lot of that came around the war and fighting the war propaganda for World War II. So this is a famous comic here of Captain America punching Adolf Hitler in the face. There were other messages to try to promote patriotism to support the US. Other characters came out in the same model. You had lots of superheroes come out. And again, it was very patriotic, very pro the American way, and to make sure that the bad countries and the bad guys didn't take advantage of us and destroy our lives. After the war, there was a decline on how things happened. So basically, comics turned to crime. There was some horror. You had just some everyday lawyer cases, things of that nature. But the interest seemed to decline a bit. As that started to decline, like everything, the government gets involved and messes it up. And so you had the Comic Code Authority come in and say, oh, these comics are causing juvenile delinquents. So they literally went through comics and they would change things. That's an example. They would ban certain words, certain things couldn't be talked about. So comics had to find another way to do things, and that was through science. Comics developed around groups like the Fantastic Four, where it was about the technology of science and how science and technology improved our lives, and then you had a story about heroes around that. They further went forward and started looking at heroes that weren't just these golden angelic creatures, but basically had feelings like humans. This one is a Spider-Man saying, boy, I don't really want to do this. I'm tired. Do I have to go forward and do more? Finally, in the 1960s, we have the Marvel comic revolution. That's where we have the Hulk. Stan Lee came out with all these characters. Spider-Man. You have the Avengers, which have now been made into movies. And so that gave a whole span of new characters. Moving forward, they went on to start explaining some things we experience as people. Like what happens with the darker tones. Batman decides as he gets older, why am I doing this? I'm going to kill the Joker. You start to see more things with blood and violence. And finally, that leads to the introduction of graphic novels. So now you could reach an audience and tell a story without just these dense words in a page. You had pictures that went along with the comics, but it told a story with an important message that people of a different generation can enjoy. They went on to be more serious. They would talk about issues of our times, right? What happens from the story of someone that grew up in the Holocaust? What happens for people that basically have to deal with monsters and things of that nature? And then finally, this spread all throughout the world. So a lot of you might know of manga. Manga is basically Japanese comics. It was a part that went through and basically spread to other cultures and other nations that existed in the world. So finally, we have an age in comics where there's a lot of diversity. So now you have female heroes, you have all kinds of minority heroes, you have LGBTQ heroes. And it's basically the sky's the limit as far as what kind of person can be a hero. To bring it all around, to go back to the point of entertainment, all these comics have now become movies. So now we have the Doomsday Avenger movie to look forward to, right? So there's a lot of movies that take these stories that started simple and bring them to life for us to enjoy in today's society. Thank you.